West Berlin during a Soviet blockade. 1962. A pivotal struggle for America's civil rights movement reaches its climax at the University of Mississippi. That's where James Meredith, under federal protection, succeeds on his fourth try in becoming the first black student to register for classes. He's admitted after deadly riots on campus leave 2 people dead, and President John F. Kennedy puts National Guard troops under federal command to try to restore.
Okay, I don't know what happened there. Hopefully I'll get the rest of Today in History later. All right, I was not expecting that.
Well, maybe we ought to turn him loose on some Democrats and see if he can hunt them too.
Really?
That's what she said.
Bracing for a possible government shutdown.
Midnight deadline looms with no deal in sight.
Investors really are concerned about the possible government shutdown.
We'll tell you what would be open and what would close.
Good morning. I'm Steve Kathan with the CBS World News Roundup. A battle now at the brink in Washington. 16 hours till a possible government shutdown, what would be the first in 17 years. A budget struggle that's a test of political wills over Obamacare. S&P futures are down 15.5 points as financial markets sell off amid the uncertainty. Our CBS News team coverage begins with congressional correspondent Bob Fuss.
With just hours left to avoid a government shutdown, the Senate today will reject the latest bill from the House that again ties government funding to trying to stop the Affordable Care Act. Republican Kevin Cramer says Democrats should give a little.
Compromise requires 2 sides. Negotiation requires 2 sides.
But Democratic Senator Chuck Schumer says Republicans need to end their obsession with the 3-year-old health law.
If they think we're going to back off, they're wrong. They're on a different planet.
He says the only option is to cleanly fund the government.
This is Peter Mayer at the White House. President Obama meets with his cabinet later today as the administration prepares for a possible government shutdown. He has repeatedly rejected Republican attempts to use this budget fight to change the health care reform law.
The American people have worked too hard to recover from crises to see extremists in their Congress cause another one.
White House says GOP efforts to tamper with the health care law are reckless and irresponsible. This face-off in Washington is causing heartburn on Wall Street. Here's CBS's Gigi Stone at the New York Stock Exchange.
The markets have really grown accustomed in recent years to fiscal fights in Washington. This time, however, the chief fear is that a shutdown would really set the stage for that larger battle over the debt ceiling. And if there's no agreement to raise the borrowing limit by mid-October, the government won't be able to issue more bonds and could default on its outstanding borrowing. Important to note, the last time the government shut down, the Dow fell 3.5%.
I'm Heather Bosch. In a government shutdown, national security and safety programs would continue. So would Medicare and Social Security, and you'd still get your mail. But federal medical research and the CDC's ability to monitor outbreaks could be hindered. Most workplace inspections would stop. Troops would stay on the job, but their paychecks could be late. Your application for a government-backed home loan delayed. IRS helplines shut down. National parks from the Statue of Liberty to Alcatraz Island would close. You'd still be able to shop for health insurance under the new health reform law, but CBS's Dan Raviv found people confused about that.
In a CBS News New York Times poll last week, just over half of Americans questioned said they don't like the health reform law on the streets of Washington.
I definitely don't have a solid enough understanding. I think it's my own fault.
I mean, it's certainly, I imagine, been public to an extent that would be satisfactory to me if I were to go and look into it.
Some are afraid of the law. Former Health Secretary Donna Shalala on why.
I have no idea unless it wasn't properly explained.
Dan Raviv, CBS News, Washington.
Now to Santa Monica, California, where a hangar at the municipal airport became an incinerator. A small plane that originated in Idaho came in for a landing last night and veered out of control, slamming into the hangar and bursting into flames.
No survivors in that hangar or on that plane. It was impossible to get in that hangar. It was collapsing when we got there.
Fire Captain John Navandro says it's not known how many people died. A court in Italy has begun re-examining the Amanda Knox case. She and a former boyfriend were acquitted 2 years ago in the murder of her British roommate. CBS's Vicky Barker joins us from the foreign desk.
Amanda Knox is exercising her right under Italian law not to attend, and her former boyfriend, Raffaele Sollecito, wasn't in the courtroom either. When Italy's highest court overturned their acquittals, it ruled the appeals panel had improperly ignored important DNA evidence. Now all the forensic evidence is being re-examined. 6 years after the murder, Knox has said she'd like to visit her roommate's grave, but Meredith Kircher's family has signaled they feel that wouldn't be appropriate. Steve?
In New Orleans, it's the second part of a trial over BP's massive oil spill in the Gulf 3 years ago.
In this phase of the trial, the judge has to determine the quantity of oil that flowed uncontrolled from the blown-out well deep below the water's surface. The feds say it was more than 4 million barrels, but BP claims it was less than 2.5 million. Legal analyst Tim Mesh says the judge also has to rule if BP was grossly negligent for the disaster.
If they're found to be grossly negligent, then their damages are tripled.
Dave Cohen for CBS News, New Orleans.
Defense Secretary Chuck Hagel is on the Korean Peninsula, scene of decades of tension, with an eye on a country in the midst of a civil war.
Secretary Hagel watched these live-fire exercises involving U.S. and South Korean forces and later traveled to the demilitarized zone, where he told reporters how the world deals with serious chemical weapons will deliver a message to Pyongyang.
North Korea has been carefully observing the activities, especially of last week at the United Nations.
Among the subjects Hagel will discuss with officials here in Seoul is whether to extend U.S. control over South Korea's armed forces past 2015. Cammie McCormick, CBS News, Seoul.
A UN inspection team's due to begin work tomorrow in Syria. It hopes to eliminate the country's ability to make chemical weapons within a month. With developments emerging on Syria and Iran, President Obama meets with Israel's Prime Minister Netanyahu at the White House today. The New York Times reports last month's terror alert prompted by intercepted al-Qaeda messages has led to a sharp drop in traffic on normal channels used by terrorists. CBS News security analyst Juan Zarate.
That makes the work of counterterrorism officials that much harder, and certainly difficult to try to get into the communication cycle of al-Qaeda, and in particular their senior leadership.
A car bombing in Peshawar, Pakistan left 42 dead and 90 hurt near a mosque and police station. In Iraq, a wave of explosions in Shiite areas of Baghdad killed at least 54. Here at home, the Justice Department's going to sue North Carolina over the state's new voting rules. Here's CBS's Stephanie Lambadakis.
One study in North Carolina found that more than 600,000 registered voters do not have a state-issued ID, with most of them being poor, elderly, and African American. The Justice Department says the purpose of this new law is to discriminate against minorities.
The Vatican says Popes John Paul II and John the 23rd will be declared saints next April. An unwelcome distinction in South Carolina. CBS's Jim Krasula says the state leads the nation when it comes to violence against women.
South Carolina has ranked in the top 10 states for domestic violence every year for the last 15 years. The state's annual rate of women killed by men is more than twice the national average.
We are seeing a growing trend of domestic violence occurring younger and younger, which is really why it's so important that we put emphasis on prevention. And again, not just with the girls, but with the girls and the boys.
Colleen Cozart is with the South Carolina Coalition Against Domestic Violence. Jim Krasula, CBS News.
In baseball, on the last day of the regular season, Miami's Henderson Alvarez pitched a no-hitter against Detroit in a 1-0 win. Today, the Texas Rangers host the Tampa Bay Rays to determine the final wildcard team in the American League playoffs. That's the World News Roundup. I'm Steve Kathan, CBS News.
Stock markets around the world fall with a U.S. government shutdown weighing heavily.
Make it a working lunch. Listen to the Marketplace Midday Update podcast for the day's top business headlines. Subscribe on iTunes or at marketplace.org/podcasts.
From 8 p.m. in New York, I'm David Brancaccio with the global perspective on business and economics. Stock markets are falling in Asia and Europe today on the prospect of a partial U.S. government shutdown. As you've been hearing, 700,000 federal employees could be temporarily laid off if Congress fails to agree on a budget bill by midnight tonight. Joining us live from London is Marketplace's Stephen Beard. Good morning.
Hello, David.
So why is our domestic political imbroglio being felt so far afield?
It's not so much this battle as the next one. I mean, it's the fear that the U.S. political system is headed once again into gridlock, and that the really crucial decision facing the Congress in a couple of weeks over the debt ceiling will also end in a stalemate. If the Congress fails to agree to raise the limit on the total amount the U.S. government is allowed to borrow, the U.S. could default. And given the size and importance of the U.S. economy, says David Cummings of Standard Life Investments, that could have a big negative impact on the world's financial markets.
You potentially have downgrades to the US debt, and it would raise borrowing costs for the whole world. So it would be a global shock of massive proportions.
Now, he says European investors seem to believe that sense will prevail and a deal will be done eventually, but nevertheless, this standoff in Congress is ringing alarm bells.
And it's not just our government shutdown roiling markets today. There's also some brinksmanship going on in Italy.
That's right. The Italian government seems to be teetering on the brink. The former Prime Minister Silvio Berlusconi has pulled his party members out of the cabinet at the weekend. The government is holding a confidence vote on Wednesday to see whether it has enough support to carry on. If it loses that vote, the third biggest economy in the Eurozone could slide back into political turmoil, and that could reignite the Eurozone debt crisis.
All right, Marketplace's Stephen Beard live from London. Now let's do the numbers. The FT100 in London is down 0.8%. DAX in Frankfurt down 0.9%. Index futures for the U.S. are all down in a similar range at the moment. Phase 2 of the trial of the oil company BP versus the federal government opens today as the court tries to decide how much to fine the company for the 2010 Gulf oil spill. Now, the biggest question in this phase will be how extensive was that spill? Marketplace's Dan Weissman reports.
Worst case, BP could be on the hook for more than $17 billion. That's a bit more than the company's profits for 2012. The fine will be based on a simple equation, a dollar amount, probably in the thousands, per barrel of oil spilled. And in the next few weeks, the court will hear about the how many barrels part. The feds and BP have both submitted estimates. They'll put experts on the stand to say why their number's better. And according to law professor David Ullman from the University of Michigan, here's where the court's problems begin, because there's really no way to know.
There weren't any meters. There wasn't any measuring device. There is no way to determine precisely how much oil was spilled.
And here's where the company's track record so far could hurt it. Loyola University law professor Blaine Lessence says BP has repeatedly put out numbers that lowballed its liability.
You know, I think when you cry wolf enough, at some point it could affect your credibility on other issues down the line.
And if that's how the judge sees things, it could make several $1 billion worth of difference to BP. I'm Dan Weissman for Marketplace.
Get Marketplace's top headlines, podcasts, and special features delivered right to your inbox each day. Subscribe to the Midday Update newsletter at marketplace.org.
The economics of high-tech medicine now. Doctors shrink cancerous tumors with radiation, and they have a number of options for this, including proton beam therapy. Some insurers now say the cost is too high for that, and they may not cover it. Still, proton beam facilities are popping up across the country, the latest a $270 million facility in Dallas. But as Kate Archer-Kent reports, even smaller cities want some proton business.
Construction crews in Shreveport, Louisiana build a cyclotron vault. It's one of at least 15 proton therapy centers rising up across the country.
This is not something that the average radiation oncology department can afford to do.
Dr. Lane Rosen is director of radiation oncology at Willis-Knighton Health System. He thinks the proton therapy that will be offered at Shreveport's $40 million facility will be the future of cancer treatment. Currently, patients who want this treatment have to make the 5-hour drive to Houston.
Even if you're not willing to accept an improvement in cure, the reduction in side effects is absolute and undebated.
The research is far from complete, according to Dr. Joel Tepper, a radiation oncology professor at the University of North Carolina, but that hasn't curbed enthusiasm.
It's very good for marketing. You can say we have the latest and the greatest.
Tepper says that the financial model here is built on volume, building a center that costs a lot of money, but packing in a lot of patience.
There's a large burden on the healthcare system in the country to pay more money for a procedure that is no better.
But private health insurers may not foot the bill for long. At least 3 major providers recently stopped covering the procedure in early stages of prostate cancer. That hasn't deterred proton center construction. Harvard University health economist Amitabh Chandra says that's because these facilities take years for investors to secure tens of millions of dollars.
Now the world has changed. And so the people who bet on proton beam are likely to be very upset with the fact that it's not going to be reimbursed by private insurers.
Back in Shreveport, Dr. Lane Rosen is focused on the day he can zap cancer cells with proton beams.